The Jetsons 1963 comic issue 1. It starts with the Jetsons floating because George accidentally flipped the anti-gravity switch when he was trying to turn off the TV. I wonder why that'd even be a switch that's available to people, because it seems useless. I guess it's there so people can have fun with it. Although it's weird that there's a switch on the wall to turn off the TV that people are in the habit of using, when you'd think every TV would have remote control with a power button for the sake of convenience. I know it's because this series came out in the time of black and white television, but people still should have had the common sense to realize that people would want to be able to control their TVs from a distance later. Also, how did George flip the wrong switch by accident anyways after all of his experience? He must have been recklessly looking away from the switches while talking to someone. Elroy returns things to normal, and the family starts heading for the to-go tube. It's a little hard to believe that literally the whole family has a different thing to go out and do for fun. George doesn't know why his dog's coming along, because his wife made the decision without him that he's going to attend a dog whistle appreciation class that wouldn't ever exist. It would have made sense if she said dog training instead. George complains that the car won't start, or the old buggy won't ignite. The comic seriously wants me to call its flying car a buggy? What a weird name for it, but it's faster than spaceship, but I'd still rather call it a car because these were supposed to be the future's cars. George gets told to fix the car, and he checks it from underneath. This reminds me of the modern Archie comics. You don't see Betty and Archie trying to be mechanics for their cars anymore, because modern cars are too advanced for just anybody to fix. So imagine how hard a futuristic car would be to fix. George must have spent a long time studying how to be a car mechanic to fix this thing in 6 seconds while his family was distracting him with their impatient whining that if they're late, they won't get to have any fun. Jane's impatient because he took 6 seconds, which implies that he's fixed the car successfully a lot before this, and yet the car gets filled with exhaust fumes. So it's confusing that he failed to fix the car when he had tons of experience and literally all he had to do is start a car that won't start. But to be fair, his entire family was talking to him, so it makes sense if that did distract him into making a mistake. But for all we know, they always do that when he fixes the car, and apparently that didn't always stop him. George complains that he always goofs when he's being rushed. So that thankfully explains that he never goofs when he isn't being rushed. The family thinks they can't go anywhere without taking a shower, and we see Elroy in a gray box called an automatic spin dryer. The weird thing is that the hole below his head isn't big enough for his head to fit through, so the artist made a mistake. Jane complains that there's no sense in going out now because they'll be late. George looks more sympathetic, feeling bad for his family. And Elroy sweetly compliments his father because he didn't really want to take a music lesson. He says he can't stand the thought of staying home all day doing nothing either. Apparently he's not interested in video games, or reading books. George offers to take his family to a picnic on a Space Island park. Luckily, every single one of them appreciates this, with Judy hugging him, even though they all wanted to do completely different things. And Judy still won't get to dance. And all you do at a picnic is eat anyways, which they could do at home. Maybe there's more to do than that there. Jane calls a space-mobile mechanic, who tells George that the only thing wrong with the car was that he forgot to turn on the ignition. Somehow, after all of his experience. When that obviously would have been the first thing anyone would have tried that would make them say the car didn't start. When he has the nerve to try to charge him $50 anyways, George puts the money in his mouth. And I like that there was a time skip to him being in the car so he didn't have to see him get punished for that. Jane complains about George driving too fast because he's still mad at the mechanic. He wouldn't call him space-headed because he wasn't stupid, he was just a jerk. At least Jane having a problem with him driving too fast goes off the fact that she became a better driver later in the show. But bad driving like this is exactly why people will never be allowed to drive their own flying cars, because car accidents are bad enough without the cars falling out of the sky. Even if it was easy to learn how to drive a flying car. Everyone could have the expertise at that sent into their brains in the future, but there'd always be people choosing to drive more recklessly because they're mad. because that's been proven by science to be a thing that happens when you're mad. It'd make more sense if the space mobiles drove themselves. Jane notices that her husband needs the holiday more than any of them, and then their space mobile gets surrounded by other ones. Why doesn't anyone have their space mobile go down or up to get past the traffic? There'd be a lot more lanes because of that ability. When George takes a left turn, which would be impossible to do accidentally, we do see a line of space mobiles below a different line of them, so it's not like that isn't allowed. I don't see why George is driving left instead of right like he was told when space mobiles can move three-dimensionally. Why does he think he can't cut back across all that traffic and live when he could just drive above or below it? Maybe there's a tight limit on how many lanes can be formed above cars, because if a car falls on one from an accident, that does enough damage as it is without that happening over and over again, from the skies being completely filled with flying cars and darkened by them in high traffic, because they could have as many roads as they want. The same logic could be used for banning cars being above other ones at all, but everyone knew that defeat the entire purpose of having a flying car, and rallied against it. And apparently when it got to a point where nobody used non-flying cars anymore, the rule still wasn't changed because there'd be huge backlash. I wonder how these people even know where the allowed roads are, because there aren't any floating visual markers. I'd say allowed roads because I don't see why the orange space mobile didn't just take a right turn and pass by the one in front, unless there's something in the design of the space mobile itself literally preventing people from doing that. And George was just unlucky that he could make this turn because there actually was an allowed road to the left of him. You'd think there wouldn't be any traffic if people could move their cars three-dimensionally. But maybe the logic is there's just so many flying cars that it happens anyways. I would have known that right away and not been confused if I was shown a row of flying cars above George's and one below, proving that he is nearly stuck in traffic. George says he'll stop and see if he can spot an alternate route. How would he spot one in this empty space? Why doesn't he just turn his car around? Then he would be driving the direction she wanted him to in the first place. He's below all of these cars and there's no cars behind his to stop him. So if he's allowed to drive below them, or is at least getting away with it, his space mobile must literally be unable to let him turn around and go the other way, because it's not an allowed road. Then George hears a siren and he's told to get that crate moving, and the unlikable traffic cop on a scooter says George can't park smack in the middle of an interplanetary expressway. George asks why not after all of his experience driving and sees a big intercelestial van line drive over his car. He says he's in the path of big cargo ships, so why did he need to be told this after all of his time driving? He's like Homer Simpson if the series wasn't annoyingly self-aware about it, causing it to exaggerate it. He drives away with the traffic cop thankfully not ticketing him. And George says there's a little planetoid where they could stop the picnic. Judy appreciates that they've got the place to themselves. This planetoid must have been terraformed and kept that way with the machine, because it'd be too small to retain a breathable atmosphere. Somehow, they enjoy eating little nutrition capsules when it'd mean they'd barely get any time to enjoy the taste of their food before it'd already be gone. So clearly society wouldn't progress to the point where people would have spent their whole lives like this and never found out what they were missing. The only way they'd choose this over actual food, which you'd think would be cheap and readily available. But we all know this. That's why the idea of food pills was probably completely abandoned in media depicting the future. But considering how much faster it is to finish a meal this way, I assume that's why people thought we'd take to them, because we could get right back to what we were doing before immediately, and if people still want a break, they can always nap. Judy leads her mom away to go pick wildflowers. Why is football called spaceball when it doesn't require being in outer space? Why does the football even look different at all? George is a good father agreeing to toss a football around with Elroy, but then he sets the switch on Bob-Along, so when he throws it, it soars over Elroy as he laughs at him. Elroy gets annoyed at a father that couldn't even be bothered to toss a football with him properly. Maybe he usually doesn't do this because he didn't expect it. I'm proud of him when he sets the switch at Oddball to get back at him, Watching the show would have you believe Elroy is nothing but a sweet kid, to be the ideal kid of the future. But here you can see he's more realistic than that. But he's still never an outright mischievous brat most of the time, which is why I like him. Because the football flies away from George, it ends up behind the spacemobile of people that are drawn to look like stereotypical untrustworthy cartoon thugs. The football sticks in their engine and someone complains that there's something wrong with it. Didn't Mythbusters say that the banana and the tailpipe prank was busted as a myth? Well, this isn't a banana. It'd be better at blocking the smoke from coming out, and it's not literally a car. The men get mad at having to fix their engine, which they see as too complicated. Why would they even try? Did they go through futuristic car mechanics school too? And they don't notice the football. For some reason, even though Elroy is a techno genius in the show, he's not the one in charge of fixing cars, because apparently they're so advanced, that's the limit to his inventor powers. So he insists on telling the stranger that's who knows how hot-headed that his father can fix anything, and then says he fixed it so that he didn't have to take his music lesson today, when he should know his father's failure to fix the car was why that happened. So this would only make sense if he knew that his father probably couldn't fix this engine, and just wanted to continue to get back at him for pranking him and ruining what could have been a fun father-son pastime. I never thought it was the type to go for a disproportionate retribution, but I'd take that over thinking this is another idiot ball. For genius. George gets rushed again trying to fix their car. Elroy at least warns them not to rush him, so either he knows this warning won't work or he changed his mind. George makes the same mistake as before and it sends out the football. One of the men leaves the flying car holding a gun because smoke was sent at him. A gun that I didn't see in the flying car. Elroy sees how to get help and says so, when he should know better than to announce his plan in front of the bad guys. At least they explain that they've got smoke in their eyes, so that's why neither of them got shot. If either of them could see Elroy, they would have stopped him because he didn't keep his mouth shut. The traffic cop from earlier gets an interplanetary code signal for help and sees the wanted space pirates who were robbing the cargo van lines. What a coincidence. They would have been arrested anyways though. The cop asks who gets the reward, and Elroy gives his father the credit for ruining their spacemobile, when he could have also said he was the one who sent the signal. George plans to spend the money on an old-fashioned, unhurried vacation, and we see his family in a US Air Force plane that George is in the front seat of, relaxing with his arms behind his head because clearly it's on autopilot. It's amusing that Jane calls this an antique and a jalopy, and says it'll take them 3 hours to fly to Hawaii in it. He doesn't care because it'll mean no one can rush him this time, even though he'll still have 3 hours of a bored family complaining behind him. At least he explains that he got this in a junkyard. In the next story, we see Astro sitting on an anti-gravity flying dog bed, which is called a modern convenience. Even though it'd only be convenient for a disabled dog that couldn't simply run after a ball to catch it, which you do instinctively. This would just be a waste of money driving the price of dog beds up, so it wouldn't be put in every dog bed. It must be a more rare, expensive kind. I guess a jet ball was invented to stay in the air until it got grabbed. That makes sense. Astro catches it off screen and then goes to take a nap. Elroy gets annoyed and acts entitled, as George reveals, because Elroy's been playing with Astro literally all day. So unless Elroy wasn't as sweet and innocent as I remember, it's out of character for him to be like this. I figured he only just started playing with him that day. Elroy says that he never takes any time off. But isn't time off for wasting time playing with Astro? But apparently to him, time off just means napping. It's interesting to see a kid say this. Why didn't Elroy plan on playing with the dog all day last story instead of assuming that he'd do nothing all day? George tells him that Astro's only one dog. It's heartwarming of him to defend him when he naturally hated him at first, and wants to go with the common sense idea of getting a robot dog that'd be no trouble at all. Elroy gets away with snarking that his father's just making excuses. And because of what George said, he gets an idea taking advantage of his being a genius, as he's standing on the one-way sidewalk. That sidewalk must not be going very fast, or it'd be a huge inconvenience insisting on being one way for no apparent reason. The city must have a lot of rich people money to have sidewalks just for convenience, when they just move people at walking speed anyways, from what I remember. So instead of being tremendously useful making bikes obsolete, it just cheats them out of exercise and they like it because they're that lazy. You might be asking, what if they break down, like in Sonic Boom Mayor Knuckles? Again, the city must have a lot of money to start with if these things exist. So they won't stay that way for long. And these things are just conveyor belts, and you don't see those breaking down every day. Elroy sees dogs in the back of a vehicle floating over the metal floor. He barks to attract attention, and gets caught in a net, and brought in front of the dog detainer from a single button press. I already love how the series takes every opportunity to have futuristic technology, making Futurama seem more like the 21st century than a realistic prediction of the future. Elroy wants to adopt a bunch of dogs, when he should know he'd never be allowed to do that. He was lucky even Astro was accepted in the house. He'd have to keep the new dog outside. He's told he'll have to fill out forms at dog headquarters, and he gets handed a lot of forms for just one dog. Well, he thankfully says he doesn't want to adopt all of the dogs, so he has that common sense. But he doesn't have that much sense, so he says they'd be old by the time he figured out that puzzlement of paper, even though he knows he's supposed to be a genius. I don't remember him being a bumbling idiot, so it's not like his smarts are only restricted to being an inventor. As I wonder why this guy even bothered handing a kid some papers as if kids are allowed to adopt dogs without their parents' supervision somehow. The guy plans to send another rocket load of homeless dogs to Satellite Arfsville. They sure have a shocking amount of stray dogs. If they still have to do this with some of them, even though the world is so overpopulated that they apparently need a law against flying over 2 vertical rows of cars at once, or else the entire sky will become crowded with flying cars. All strays are sent to that satellite to live happily ever after. At least if this guy isn't lying because Elroy's a kid. Elroy plans to help himself to one of those dogs on that satellite. He runs to the junk dump and finds things like a levitation device to use to build a space raft. Once again, it was just conveniences getting him this far, but convenient coincidences happen in real life, so I don't care as long as the plot's lighthearted. Elroy flies his raft with an air dome towards the satellite, which somehow wasted the materials and time on a sign bigger than itself to warn fast traffic not to run into it, when that wouldn't prevent that anyways if it was somehow a possibility. Whoever made that satellite was stupid and frivolous with its massive amount of money. Elroy enjoys getting greeted by all of the dogs. Somehow literally all of them are happy to see him. I guess dogs were genetically engineered to all be friendly to little kids. Elroy pets one of the dogs, as I wonder why he won't just plan to come here to visit every time Astro naps, instead of planning to adopt another dog, because it's obvious George would say no to that. Somehow, Elroy hears a dog whistle. Either this isn't a dog whistle, because humans can hear it too, which makes no sense unless it was cheaper, or humans were genetically improved or had technology to hear higher pitched sounds. But why would that be the case when it'd be a pointless waste of money? Another person being really frivolous with his money, apparently. It'd have to be secretly done to newer generations because humanity would be too squeamish about genetic engineering to agree to that, when all it'll seem to do is inconvenience people because they'd be able to hear dog whistles. Maybe that was the point, because dog whistles could be crowd control against protesters and criminals. But why not just use a regular whistle? It's not like the people whistling will always be unable to hear the dog whistles after all, unless they'd have a way to ensure that. Elroy sees a rocket shaped like a dog whistle that explodes into bones, and he comes to the conclusion that the bones are meant to feed the dogs, despite being mere bones, and not even food capsules. Elroy tells the dogs all aboard, somehow being too stupid to realize that they wouldn't all fit on the space raft. I'd rather have George as the person holding the idiot balls to propel the story along, because he's not a genius. A screeching noise sends the dogs running from a space bat that has an antenna on it like it's a cyborg. Why would people have genetically engineered the alien bats to have useless antennas, or make robot bats that do nothing but scare the dogs here looking for stuff to eat? Just to be jerks? they'd have to actually be robots that can eat, because a team of scientists wouldn't be allowed to genetically engineer these things just to be jerks. Why does it have to have an antenna? Elroy runs towards the space raft out of fear and breaks the control stick by accident, fortunately explaining away that it's a piece of junk. Of course, no wonder what's in a junkyard. George wonders why Elroy is not with Astro to take him on his afternoon float. Afternoon? But Elroy was playing with Astro all day. Apparently, George only exaggerated. Astro's caller gets a distress call from Elroy. There'd be no reason the call would be sent to a mere dog instead of George if Astro didn't have human intelligence. That'd only be the result of genetic engineering or cybernetics for people's convenience. But since that wasn't explained, it always seemed annoying from how arbitrary it looks that he can talk. None of the other dogs here can talk, so they got very lucky finding one of the only ones or the only one that can. Astro uses his floater to go out the window, and because George happens to be holding the leash, he gets pulled with them. The story ignores believability because George has to hold his breath because he's leaving the Earth's atmosphere, and yet he somehow survived going all the way over to Elroy. They both did. It didn't need to be Astro saving Elroy. It could have been that his distress call was sent to an invention he made in case he ever needed rescuing, which could automatically go to, the tracking device hidden in Elroy's clothes apparently, because it's on a satellite, not a place where a GPS could find him. Elroy says he's got to steer the bat in the path of something. Then he sees bones show up, revealing that he steered the bat in the path of another convenient dog bone missile. So Astro wasn't necessary to save him from the bat at all. The bat gets knocked away instead of destroyed somehow. He says he made a mistake by thinking that he could make up for Astro with a bunch of dogs to replace him. He had no reason to think he needed more than one extra dog, and this didn't prove he didn't need another dog. Instead, he somehow decides no mutt could take Astro's place when Astro only showed up because he had technology that received his automatic call and tracked him down, and any mutt could do the same thing. George still doesn't call him out on nearly getting him killed going to a satellite with no air dome. It should have been shown that the dog floater could have an air dome appear over it. Elroy agrees to give Astro time to nap and then turns around and uses him as a rocking horse when he's trying to sleep, and George is fine with this. In the next story, Judy gets sent to high school by a floating machine only big enough to hold her, and her fellow students plan on throwing a party for Judy's current boyfriend at Judy's place. Judy knows her father won't approve of a party, but doesn't want to let her friends down. So she plans on asking her mom instead, and if this works, how is George supposed to do any parenting of his kids if she cuts him off at the knees at every turn? Jane tells Judy to wait until she's finished making dinner. She drops a little pill while holding a container called Instant Turkey, and then the pill magically becomes a real turkey. Oh good, we aren't expected to believe they ate nothing but food pills. They're just so impatient to move on to doing other things at the picnic that they put up with them unnecessarily. I say this because if these people allied with witches to make instant turkey pills, they can make pills that do the same for every other type of food. And in fact, we do see a container of instant potatoes behind her. I suppose Nicole's nanotechnology could do the same thing if she can create anything using nanites. But I never saw the difference between that and magic anyways. And she needed to draw from the energy source of an entire irradiated city to power that technology. What if that's how this is possible? Or it's just growing turkey from the stem cells of turkey meat. Anyways, Jane says there was something she was supposed to remember about Saturday. But she hugs her daughter and says she could trick her husband into letting her throw the party. George goes home, revealing how much inflation increased in the future, because a future dollar is 900 times less valuable. Either that or the rich are 900 times richer for some reason, and are miraculously forced to pay salaries 900 times higher to compensate. George wears a helmet for some reason, and walks towards an automatic closet, which changes him into his clothes, presumably with robot hands, like in Sonic Underground. He complains that the closet needs fixing because it's chewing up his slippers. George plans to dial the kitchen and see what's for dinner through a screen. There he hears Jane tell Judy that she'll suggest going to the movies, getting George out of the way for Judy. Then he says that Saturday's his birthday, so the party must be for him. and I thought she was forgetting their anniversary. It's interesting to me that the wife forgot the husband's special date for once, instead of the usual forgotten anniversary on the husband's part. He decides not to spoil their fun because of that. On Saturday night, George says there's a re-release of Gone with the Wind. Why would people ever say all of those re's? And no matter how popular that movie is, it won't be casually shown in theaters in the future instead of current movies. We see Jane and George at a drive-in theater, which miraculously still exists in the future. Won't people be taking up gas the whole time they're floating in the air? They must have a ton of gas to spare. Somehow Jane was dumb enough to forget her purse when picking it up as muscle memory, and insists on going home when she clearly isn't planning to use the purse today. They're already in front of the projection screen, so clearly someone already paid for it. George is the most forgiving husband in the world because he happily agrees to go back home. Maybe because he assumes this is just her excuse to get him back home for a surprise party. He confirms this in a thought bubble as she's naturally confused. Jane tells him to wait here until she gets back with the purse, but he'd rather disobey his wife for no apparent reason. He lets them know how much he appreciates throwing a party in his honor, and tells them to enjoy themselves. Hopefully everyone in the room heard that, and is going to be smart enough to humor them from now on, because they have no excuse for correcting him to get him mad. Naturally, he asks why Jane invited all of Judy's friends instead of his friends. She comes up with a lie on the spot that she thought it'd be fun to act young on his birthday, even though obviously hanging around teenagers would only make you feel old. But still, it ends up being a smart lie because he miraculously says she's right. Maybe he was just humoring her. George decides to show the kids how he used to party, as they look unenthusiastic about it. Somehow Judy asks why her dad is ruining the party when she should have heard everything he said before. Jane goes back to him with the cake and sees him doing a dance. Someone tells Judy he was telling him all of the slang he used to use. And after the party, George says he feels 10 years younger. I like that he never found out the truth. Judy wonders what she'll say to her friends later, and go figure they loved the party. In fact, Judy's friend says he'd like him to come to a party at his place, where there's a sweet ending because Judy has fun dancing with him. This could have easily been as depressing as you'd expect. Then there's a black and white page where somebody flies by George with space wings, which George doesn't have because they're too expensive, but not every other bit of frivolous technology he has. He finds used space wings for half off because they weren't that expensive apparently. They were half off because they only half work. Then he would have been warned before he got to use them that they were faulty products, if they were even allowed to sell them in the first place. In the first story, George accidentally ruins his family's plans for the day because they rush him and cause him to fix the spacemobile without turning the ignition first, sending smoke at them. How someone could forget to turn the ignition when it'd be muscle memory at this point is anyone's guess. He could have had the car not start because of a realistic reason, and easily had the plot not happen purely because of an idiot ball. He decides to make it up to them by taking them somewhere for a picnic, establishing himself as a sympathetic family man. On a whim, he ends up not even tossing a football with Elroy right, because he switches it to a setting that makes it harder to catch just to prank him, which apparently is rare for him, so the football could have easily not ended up switched to another setting by Elroy, and jammed in the tailpipe of a thief's spacemobile. You just have to assume that Elroy wanted to continue to get back at his dad when he told the thieves that his dad could fix their car, because he already proved that sometimes he can't do that. It sure is lucky that because Elroy apparently believes in disproportionate retribution, but not too much, the plot progresses as it does. I like that the traffic cop gets to redeem himself for being annoying, and never ticketed George when he first showed up. Things only went wrong for these thieves because of sheer luck with George's random whim, which I have to guess was only justified by him wanting to get back at a member of his family when they were all rushing him earlier. The plot's a bit forced from George's stupidity, but it was interesting and charming enough to make up for that. So far I like the world of the Jetsons enough to forgive it for this kind of confusing writing, like George not simply flying over or below the cars and instead taking the wrong turn and sticking with it with no explanation. They would have had a picnic anyways. But if they went where George always planned, he wouldn't have met these guys, so ultimately that's why this plot was contrived. This story was about Elroy wanting another dog to play with, because Astro takes naps, and he'd rather play with the dog all day. He goes to the dog catcher, somehow believing that he could adopt a dog right there. Somehow gets told he could come to the dog shelter without a parent around. Somehow thinks he would be too stupid to figure out the paperwork to adopt, and then lucks out finding materials in a junkyard to make a space raft to get to a stray dog satellite. I liked this bit of world building, but I hate that not only did things progress to this point because of Elroy's insane stupidity, when he could have easily built a new dog instead like I expected, but there was a dangerous space bat with apparently no explanation in what's supposed to be a safe haven for dogs to live. I get it being a space bat because a regular bat couldn't survive going here and think to do so. I get that maybe people built this bat to be jerks, because some people do things just out of spite. People must have made it because they aren't dog people and think there's too many dogs to be sustainable. But if these things can exist, why the hell didn't anyone build a security system to protect the dogs from it already? How would this be the first time? But the worst problem is that somehow George and Astro survived being sent out of the Earth's atmosphere by Astro's dog floater when he receives Elroy's distress signal. The floater could have easily had an air dome appear over it. It wouldn't be the first example of overly convenient, futuristic conveniences that seem like frivolous wastes of money. Astro wasn't needed to kill the space bat. Elroy got it killed by luring it into a dog bone missile meant to feed the dogs with. Bones that apparently have extra nutrients pumped in. Instead of Astro and George showing up to get him home, it should have been an automatic flying invention of Elroy's, as it could survive space. Instead, this idiot plot has me wondering how Elroy didn't get them both killed. As if the floater was actually moving so fast that George would have only had to hold his breath for a minute, he would have been killed by the sheer G-force of going that fast. Even if he put his hand all the way in the leash's hole so he wouldn't have been able to let go. This story was a cliche plot where Judy wants to throw a party, and gets her mom to get George out of the house so she could throw it. At least it's interesting that instead of the party being her idea, it was thrown to celebrate a boyfriend of hers having a sports achievement, and that George finds out about their plans, but assumes it's a birthday party for him. It's also a nice twist that he never finds out the truth, and everyone appreciates him showing them how he used to dance at their age. It's easily the best plot in the issue, with nothing actually wrong with it, other than the fact that its premise is a boring cliche on paper. Judy can't really do much that's interesting, because she never really steps outside of the framework of being an annoyingly boy-crazy typical teenage girl, so she only does a few things they do. Well, you never know what Elroy's gonna do.